I was the one who filed the order. That is the part I have to live with. Not the vote. The convocation had 41 seated delegations, and the motion carried by 37. Not the guards who removed her. They were following procedure, as guards do. Not even presiding arbiter Kaswellorvath, who read the contempt ruling in that flat, satisfied voice he reserved for decisions he considered final. I was the clerk who encoded the order into the official record of the Sorren Accord Convocation and stamped it with the seal of the session. My hand, my entry, my file number. VRC 7714, Contempt MOURNE, CALLISTA, Envoy Designate Earth Delegation. It took me 11 days to understand what I had done. The session had been running 4 hours when Envoy MOURNE spoke out of recognized turn. That was the infraction, not her words, which the record will show were 3 sentences long and delivered without any elevation of voice. She simply stood from the observer's bench, which the Accord's procedural code designates as a non-participating position, and stated that the motion before the chamber was in violation of Article 17, subsection 4, and that she wished the objection entered into the record before the vote was called. Arbiter Orvath declined. She said she understood, sat back down and said nothing further. The motion passed. It concerned the reclassification of 2 transit corridors adjacent to Earth's registered approach lanes, a reclassification that would, in practical terms, make those corridors unavailable to human vessels without Accord licensing fees that no human trade consortium could currently afford. It was not presented as punitive. It was presented as a routine administrative update. 37 delegations voted in favor. 3 abstained. 1. The METHRAN Compact, small and old and careful, voted against. Envoy MOURNE made no further comment. Arbiter Orvath cited the earlier interruption. He said the Accord observer bench carried specific behavioral obligations, and that speaking from it without recognition constituted contempt of the session. He said this had consequences. He said this in the same tone he used for everything. Flat, patient, the voice of a body that had been governing longer than any of its members' grandparents had been alive. The guards came from the side passage. CALLISTA MOURNE stood when she saw them, the way you stand when you have been expecting something and have decided to meet it on your feet. She did not argue. She did not look at the chamber. She looked at the METHRAN delegate, a small gesture, a slight inclination of the head, something I have turned over many times since, and then she walked with the guards through the lower exit. The session resumed in 4 minutes. I filed VRC 7714 before the day cycle ended. The contempt order, the removal authorization, the procedural justification. I cross-referenced it to the session transcript, attached the vote count, and sealed it under the arbiter's cipher. It was, by every measure I knew at the time, a routine filing. I had filed 40 or 50 things exactly like it in my 3 years with the convocation's record office. I went home, I ate, I slept. The silence from Earth began the next morning. Not silence in the dramatic sense. There was no moment where a communication channel went dark or a fleet disappeared from the boards. The Earth delegation simply had no one to speak for it. The observer bench sat empty. Queries to the Human Trade Consulate on VETHRA Prime went unanswered for the first 2 days, which the Accord's administrative office attributed to processing lag. By day 4, the attribution changed to diplomatic review. By day 6, no one was attributing it to anything. I noticed it because the record office notices these things. My job was to flag any outstanding procedural items connected to recent filings. VRC 7714 had 1. Envoy MOURNE quotes verbal objection, declined for entry by Arbiter Orvath at session, had nonetheless been spoken aloud in the chamber. Under Accord procedural code, A declined verbal entry could be petitioned for retroactive insertion within 14 days of the session by any co-signatory delegation in good standing. Earth had not filed the petition. Earth had not filed anything. I pulled the file again on day 7. Not for any procedural reason. I told myself it was thoroughness. The truth is that the silence had begun to sit on me in a way I could not name, and I wanted to look at the thing I had filed until I understood why. It took me until day 9. Article 17 of the Sorren Accord is the mutual defense provision. It is 17 pages long, almost entirely technical, and concerns the obligations of signatories to one another in the event of what the Accord terms an act of material harm committed against a signatory delegation acting in official capacity. I had read it once during my orientation, 3 years prior. I had never had cause to read it again. Most clerks haven't. It is one of the original provisions, written into the Accord before the current membership existed, when the founding bodies were smaller and more frightened of each other and wrote everything as if every clause were a weapon. Earth had petitioned for co-signatory status under Article 17 4 years ago. The petition had been reviewed, assessed as low priority, and granted by the Accord's Secondary Ratification Committee during a procedural session that no senior delegate attended. It had been filed in the archive under a classification that cross-referenced to transit lane agreements, not to the main membership rolls. I had never seen it. No one in the current record office had ever seen it. I found it on day 9. I sat with it for a long time. The Mutual Defense Provisions Activation Clause is 3 sentences. The relevant sentence reads, "An act resulting in the removal, detention, or death of a co-signatory delegation's officially credentialed envoy, conducted within or by an Accord session body, constitutes a material act of harm and activates the provision's obligations in full, without requirement for further declaration by the aggrieved co-signatory." I sat with that for a long time, too. On day 11, the documents arrived. Every signatory whirled simultaneously. The Accord's own record bureau received one as well, delivered through the standard diplomatic transmission channel that Earth's consulate had not used in 11 days. The document was not a declaration. It was not a demand. It carried no fleet coordinates, no threat language, no list of grievances. It was a single page. It was a receipt. Specifically, it was Earth's formal acknowledgement that Article 17's activation clause had been triggered by the proceedings of Convocation Session 1. 847, the session I had filed under VRC 7714, and that Earth considered the Accord's mutual defense obligations operative as of the moment Envoy Callista Morn had been removed from the observer bench by session guards, which constituted, under Article 17's definitions, an act of material harm against a credentialed envoy conducted by an Accord session body. Earth was not declaring war. The Sorren Accord had declared it, 37 votes to 3, in a session that lasted 4 hours, over a transit lane reclassification that had already been rendered moot. The receipt carried one line of human text beneath the formal citation. It read, "The objection we requested be entered into the record is now entered." That was all. I was the last person in the record office when the transmission came in. The rest of the staff had gone home. I read the document twice, then cross-referenced it to VRC 7714, then to the Article 17 co-signatory registration, then to the session transcript where Arbiter Orvath had declined to enter Envoy Morn's objection. The chain was clean. The citations were correct. The Accord's own procedural history made the case in 8 cross-references. I thought about Callista Morn inclining her head at the Mithrin delegate before she walked out. The Mithrin Compact had voted against the transit reclassification. They were the only delegation that had. They were small and old, and I had wondered at the time why they had bothered. I did not wonder anymore. They had known what they were voting against. They had wanted the record to show it. 3 years earlier, When Earth's Article 17 co-signatory petition had been filed, the clerk who processed it had been required to notify all standing delegations. Most of them, including mine, had filed the notification under administrative archive and moved on. The Mithrin Compact had requested a full copy of the co-signatory terms. I do not know what happens next. That is above my station and outside my file number. I know what the Accord's own mechanisms require because I have now read Article 17 4 times through, and I have filed a summary of my findings with the Senior Archivist's Office, which is the only thing my station permits me to do. I know that Callista Morn spoke 3 sentences from the observer bench in a voice that did not rise, and asked for the objection to be entered into the record. I know that the arbiter declined. I know that I filed the order. VRC 7714, my hand, my entry, my file number. I have been a records clerk for this convocation for 3 years and 4 months. I do not think I will be one much longer, not because I will be dismissed, though I may be, but because I am not certain there will be a convocation left to keep records for. The silence from Earth was not mercy. It was the sound of a receipt being prepared.